Hello, my friend. My name is Anton from coding.com, and today is the 10th session of our Code Express blog series. So today we will cover one very interesting, I think, and very useful concept. The concept is called user-defined functions. Across our previous sessions, we have seen that we have used multiple functions already, such functions as split, or join, or print, or some others. And in the general, as you have seen, the function is something where you could provide some arguments in the input. The function is doing some processing for you, and as an output, you get the result of this processing. In the previous code, we have worked with while and if, and so all other things, and if you have carefully looked at the previous video, could have seen that we have used some part of the code multiple times, and we didn't create any functions so far. That's why we have copied the same piece of the code multiple times. And that is where the user-defined functions comes handy. You could create the function once you create it, you debug it, troubleshoot, find what is working correct, what is not correct, fixing it. And then once you have one correct working function, then with this function you could just use it in your Python code, and as a result your code gets cleaner, your code gets smaller, whereas there are parts where it really needs to do this computation, they are just, again, they're small and put in some part of your code, some that all others part of your code could reuse it. To give you some example how these things are working, we will rewrite the code from the previous session where I was creating the tool to generate a list of the IP address within this certain range, and we will rewrite this tool, so this Python code, using the user-defined function approach. Let's take a look. How does it look like? Let me share my screen, and we get started as usually with our code, with our sessions. So to get started, so we don't have any files here yet, I will copy the file that we have created the previous session so that we could start working on it. So we copy from the lesson number 9 the file while.py, and we would save it as def.py. So why we say it as a def.py? So def is a keyword which stands for define, and this is exactly the keyword which allows us to generate the user-defined functions. So let's go inside of this code, and let's first of all, before we start doing any changes, verify that this is working correctly. So we will execute it using the command /def.py. So I get in the list of the IP addresses. As you see, that's exactly was the standpoint where we have ended our session the last time. So this was the initial range, and this range we are taking to actually work with to parse this range, to split it into two separate IP, starting and ending, and generate the list of their IP address within this range. So the code has right now two big parts, variables and body, and body is doing all these things. Before we start writing the user-defined functions, let's analyze what we might need. So if you take a look in this part of our code, you will see that we first of all split the original variable into two elements. That's exactly what we was doing the last time. And then we have the block of the commands translating or converting this string into an array, then finding the length of the array, so meaning the amount of the elements we have in the list, starting creating some basic variables, and then using the while functions we was going across this list that we have generated, doing the necessary math functions to generate out of IP address in the dotted decimal format and the string to the single integer variable value. And the same set of the commands, if you look carefully, we do two times. So the first we do it for the IP address, IP_start, same set of the command, and then exactly the same set of the commands for the IP end. So what we will do right now, we will write a basic Python user-defined functions that would allow us to reuse the same concept multiple times. So the structure, how we would create it, we will create a new part in our code. Let's call it user-defined functions. It's not necessary to follow this approach using the comments defining, but it's just for yourself. Is easier to understand when it's part of your code you have. So to define the user-defined function, we need to use a keyword def. We will create the name of the function. Actually, we could create anything. We will call it IP underscore str underscore integer. So it means like we are working with IP in string in integer format. And then input, we need to provide the name of the argument, how we will call whatever we put to the input of the function internally. So let's call it input var, so input variable. So every comments within this user-defined function should be indented at least by the 4 spaces, same like we have it previously in the if or in the while or for loops. So, and that is what we are doing here. So we don't need to think about what we put internally on this comment, right? So what we were doing previously, we have a variable into a string format, and the outcome, we were getting the number into the integer. So basically what we need to do, what our function needs to do, it needs to convert at the first point the string into integer. So what we will do, we will copy just the content of this code. So starting from, yeah, let's actually start from here. We copy to our user-defined function, we indent everything by 4 spaces. So important point with this, so typically there is a very important consideration you need to do. So you can use within user-defined function the name of the variables and hence the value of the variables which you have defined in your main body, but this is very bad practice. How it is recommended to do to make code scalable, the user function should not rely on anything besides you put to the input of the function. So in the input of the function, in this case, we would like to provide the string, and the output, we should get an certain integer value, right? So all the name of the variables which we should use in our user-defined function should be either locally defined in this user-defined function, so created within, or put to the input to the function. We should not use something global because it is bad and it could break something in your program if you don't follow this rule. And that is exactly the reason why we use user-defined functions. It is a unified or uniform processing which shall not rely on anything others besides something that you put to the input of the function. So in our case, the first operation, so the name of the variable, how we would call it internally, it is calling the input variable. So we'll show a bit later how exactly we utilize. First of all, we're creating. So this input variable for us would have the string. So the string with the IP address. So that's why what we would need to do further, we instead of IP start, we would be calling the input variable. So we put this, this would be how the name of the variable would be called inside our function, and we are using this. So split this variable. So we could work further with it using this input variable, same way like we was using with the IP function. So we convert the string into the list. Then we count the amount of the elements within our list. Then instead of number IP start, so we will call something like temp value. So let's call it, so generally it is a variable that has any name, but in this particular case, we would call it, we create this local variable inside of our function. Why? Because we would need to return this result back. And num underscore IP underscore s, we will leave to our main body where we do this computation. So in order not to change the name of this variable further. So we have replaced what we need to replace in our beginning chart. So the operating, as you see, inside of the user-defined function with the variable called input var, which is a like local name of the variable which is existing within this function. So instead of, that's why number IPS, we would operate with the temp value. And here, instead of having IP start, we use everywhere input underscore var as an name of our variable. So we have created this concept. Now, the last but not least, once you have created your user-defined functions and you do some processing internally, you need to make sure that the result of the function execution you could get back. So to get the result of the function execution, you need to have a keyword return, and this keyword after keyword returns and space, and then you provide the values that you would like to return back. It could be directly mass function, some computation. It could be name of the variable that stores information for you. So for us, the information is aggregated in the keyword temp value, and that's why we so not the input var, but rather temp value. So something that we do the calculation locally, we would like to get it out. So now we could rewrite the content of our script in the way that so what this function is doing. So upon getting the string, it would return us the integer. So looking back, the string are generated directly here. So that's why we could remove this part and just as we use further in our code, the variable num underscore IP underscore s, just assign to this value the result of the execution of the function input string, put in the proper input here. So what we do, we delete these strings, and here we use it further as just any other function which are built in the Python. So it's called IP underscore str underscore int, and at the input to this function, we put the content of our start IP range. So same actually is applicable for the second part. So where we calculate number IP end, we could just delete these things, and using the same function, we just put another input. Now we need to verify that it's calculating properly and getting us results properly. We'll use the function print, and then we put these two variables together. Let's try to execute this script one more time. So the script is executed, meaning that there is no change in the logic, and all our these elements num IPS and num IPE, which we are using further, are calculated properly. So the list of the IP is right. So that is the most important thing. And what we could also take a look here. So we have printed in the beginning these two elements. So you see that the function is working properly, and you have seen that it's already significant. First of all, save of the space, because we don't need to put this information twice. Second, we decouple the logic, the processing, and the variables. And that's exactly the beauty for the programming languages in Python in particular. So we have decoupled this, and our code looks right now much better and much more so-called Pythonic. So it's really how the code should be right. Now, the amount of the variables that you could provide on the input is more than one. I mean, we have created that is one, but you could define any number of variables depending on your logic. And that's why the user-defined function could be simple, could be complex. Depending if you could justify that having a complex function is advantageous for you, you could do it as complex as you would like. Now, in our case, we have two major operations. We have an operation of converting string into integer when the string is an IP address in dotted decimal format, and then converting of the integer back to the string into IP address format or dotted decimal. So what we could do then here, we could extend the structure of our function that we provide two variables and the input. The first one would have as an input type of the operation, so from integer to string or from string to integer. And then we could create a conditional internally, which depending on the operation time, so what the direction of conversion, would have a necessary action. So let's do this. So we would create here the condition. So first of all, we will have an additional variable. It would called, let's say, operation. So now we would need to call the function with user-defined function with two variables, and that's very important. You need to call it with the amount of the variables you have defined. If you have more or you have less, your function would fail and your code, hence execution, would fail. So we do now internally the condition if operation equal get string, get integer, then we do the computation that we have provided here. So don't forget to add 4 spaces indentation everywhere. So 4 spaces. Now return, we would still need to return this value because regardless of which operation we are doing, we would need to have this value. So that's why what we would add also here, the second conditional using elif. If you have questions how to properly create the conditional, take a look at the appropriate video in our Code Express series. You just could find in the playlist here on the some videos above comparing to this one, and we add the second conditional, which would say get string. So what get string is doing, so get string is converting the integer back to original string in the dotted decimal format. So we were doing this using this part of our code, and that's exactly what we would like to have. So the idea how it was working, so we was taking this integer, we was dividing it by the necessary power 256, sorry, and then we were just creating the array with this whole part of the division, and now we need to, and afterward it was converting this into a string. So now we need to take these commands back to us, and in the second part of our this if else conditional, we would rewrite it using our internal variables, how we could call it here. So we are working with the temp value. So this is a variable that we are conveying outside of our user-defined functions once their execution is complete. So we add, that's why here is the name of this user-defined functions, sorry, of this temporary variable. So in order not to change the last value, so we are aggregating the information in this temp value. So we change the name of the variables, replacing the global values with something that we have here locally. And once the computation is complete, we need to convert the array into a string variable. So again, we would convert into a variable the array. So we would have the same name because we don't need to contain the array further. And that should generate for us this element. So we are working with the element called decrement. So that is something internally we use in our function. However, we assign the name, the value outside of our loop. So that's why instead of having number IPT, we would call it as an input variable. So that is the key that we are going to use. That's we have put in the beginning of our user-defined function, something that we put to the input. Now we could also change a bit the name convention, so index. So that's why we know that we are working with the index, and it's doing the same part like is doing above, but just from different angle. And that should be basically that's it. So the logic when we would call the user-defined function IP street integer with two variables. First, we provide the value what we would like to convert, and the second we provide just the keyword either get integer or get string. And depending on what the second key is, we would execute either generation of the string or processing conversion string into integer or integer to string. So looks okay. Let's verify that is working properly. Now we need to remove this part of our code. So we would delete all this stuff. Let's add here the following operations. So IP address string would be equal to IP int, IP str int. So the name of our function, we need to provide here two elements. So the first one is the element that we are incrementing. So number IPT, so temporary, and the operation is get string. So we would need to replace here the content of the format with the IP address str. And in our function above, here we would need to add a second variable, second argument that we put, get int and get int. So let's verify whether our script is working back. So it is working properly. So you see we are getting the list of our IP addresses within the range we have defined, starting from 3 and then counting till the 115. So it goes through all our elements up to the end. So taking a look once more in our code before we close this session. We right now have a function called IP str int. So their function requires us to provide two arguments as input. The first argument would contain a value which we would like to convert, either string, and then we convert it to integer, or the integer and then we convert it to string, and operation, so which is telling us whether we need to work with the conversion from string to integer, or second value where we need to convert the integer back to the string. We have adapted our code internally with user-defined function so that all the variables that are local, that are used within the user-defined function, they either conveyed as an input to this function or they created locally, internally within the function. So they by no mean meddle somehow with our main code part. And the value that is returning outside of the user-defined function is stored for the both part, of our conditional, for the first if and for the second elif, in the temp value variable, and this variable, using the return keyword at the end of our function, is conveyed out. And we call this function 3 times. So the first time when we convert our starting and our ending IP address into an integer. So that's how we are getting, you see our code is much cleaner. And in the second part where we converted back our string our integer to a string. So the code looks much easier to read, much cleaner, and it works with the same speed, so perhaps even quicker, I don't know. But definitely it's something that it provides you possibility to split the logic and the variables, and that is all the programming about. So that is it for today. We have covered today user-defined function. I think you have liked it. And this was the 10th session of Code Express series. So it concludes the first 10th block covering the Python basics, which you need to know. Like, it's a vital toolkit for you to navigate in the Python code world. The second part, so it will be next 10 more Python classes, will be focused on more advanced concept, which I used in the Python coded and predominantly in the area of the network automation. Stay subscribed. If you like this video, distribute it on your social medias, YouTube, put our likes, put your likes for us. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and goodbye.